important seminar which promises to be very interesting. However, before we proceed, let us stand for the national anthem. Thank you. You can sit down. Well, welcome again. It gives me great pleasure to extend to you a very warm welcome on behalf of the National Security Policy Coordination Unit, and to say how grateful we are for you to accept our invitation to convene the seminar. We expect representatives from a wide cross-section of participants from the private and public sector whose activities are directly impacted by national security, including persons from academia. We'll be joined later this morning by Minister Bunting, Minister of National Security, and this afternoon we'll be joined by Honorable Anthony Ilton, Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce. We have with us our regional security expert, Mr. O'Neill Hamilton from the United Nations, who will be making a special presentation. At the end of each session, you will have the opportunity to ask questions, exchange ideas, and have discussions. It is advised that you take advantage of this gathering. Professor Clayton, who is well known in the security field and who was our lead consultant in the development of our national security policy, will be our chair for this morning, and Dr. Fritz Pinnock will be our chair this afternoon. It is our hope that today's program will be very interesting and informative for us all. It has become commonplace to say that security is Jamaica's problem. So today we are putting security on the front burner, as this is the most relevant to the achievement of sustained economic growth. The theme of the seminar is Jamaica's national security, enabling and supporting investment for national development. The main objective of this seminar is to bring awareness of the role of national security for sustainable development. We are all aware that the security and safety of Jamaica is relevant to the success of the country's economic reform program for sustained economic growth. We at the National Security Policy Coordination Unit use the National Security Policy as our reference. The policy was approved by Cabinet in December, and this can be accessed on the web as shown on the two screens in front of us. I think it was supposed to be there, sorry. The policy identifies security as a core developmental goal and an essential precondition for delivery of other developmental goals. It highlights that government spending on national security is a primary investment for business development and economic growth. The major development that will benefit from an enabling national security environment is the implementation of the Jamaica Global Logistics Hub Initiative, which positions the country to be the fourth global logistics hub in the world. The impact of such arrangement will bring new challenges. For example, the country's border security concerns will be impacted by the need to balance security with freer movement. I must mention, yesterday we went on a familiarization tour of all the physical infrastructure of that's associated with the logistics hub, and I think we were all enlightened by what we heard. Very positive things going on. Based on the feedback from the group that went, everybody was quite happy. It was certainly an eye-opener for me. It is within this context that we are here to exchange information and to improve our understanding of the challenges and measures taken as we work towards a safe and prosperous Jamaica. Much has been achieved, but there's always more that remains to be done. And a seminar like this, where knowledge and information is shared in the pursuit for better understanding, and it is essential for us to have discussions on that. However, it is you, the participants, who will help us to develop more effective policies as we move towards a logistics-centered economy. Finally, on behalf of the National Security Policy Coordination Unit, welcome again, and I hope that this seminar will be an informative one for you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. You've all got your agendas, I believe, in front of you. I'd have to tell you, therefore, that there have been one or two changes to the agenda, a few changes in the running order. But don't worry about that. We'll just sort that out as we go along. As you can see, we have some very serious heavyweight speakers with us today. But the main event, the single most important event of the day, is one we're going to take first. And this is a presentation by Miss Kamika Brownford. Kamika, would you like to come up here now? Kamika is grade 7 at Camperdown High School. She was born in Kingston, and she's going to read us a poem called Gateman by Owen Blacker Ellis. Kamika, would you like to come forward now?
Me is a gate man, key man, watchman, security expert. Everybody have to pass through me. Me no partial carter or curry favor. Everybody have to show ID. You coulda want be manager, governor, or prime minister. Me solid more than rock. If you don't respect me and brandish ID, the main gate going just stay lock. Me is a gate man, key man, watchman, security expert. Me have power and carry weight. You know how much big management and admin people get disciplined when me at hold front gate? Me make them murmur and grumble and beg and explain and complain and wait. Me make them lose them temper, cry, eye water, and get inside all 2 hours late. Woman walk pan chalk line, man get vexed and resign to all the power of my key. And me no use conscience or play ease up. Me no give blind and me no cry cray. Me is a gate man, key man, watchman, security expert. Me teach big neck people, lesson for free. Anybody pass through me learn quick. Me no take argument, me only take ID. Even the nice personal management lady she, one Indian lady named Miss Lee. Me know her good cause she interviewed me and give me the bunch of key. But she come work last Thursday about, man in your key, oops, I left my ID. Me just look pan her tough and say, not enough, that now go work in a Miss Lee. She turn bread, then she starts stutter and splutter. Then she reason, then she play. Me just kiss my teeth and show her what the sign say. Staff must show ID. She missed 2 meetings, cancel 3 appointments and go back home McLaren and for her ID. Cause me is a gate man, key man, watchman, security expert. People have to respect me. Even the big chairman, CEO guy, drive up with him chauffeur named Chris SUV, yeah. A film picture hang up in the gearhouse and the place name after him. But him never have no idea. Me just give them the drill. But them park up the still till fight broke out and 7 more security intervene. Me have to thump down 2, kick down 2, and karachi the other 3. Cause me is a gate man, key man, watchman, security bad man. And last week them firm about my teeth the bunch of key.
Oh, come on, guys. You can do better than that. Big hand for Kamika. Kamika, that was absolutely brilliant. Oh, and I should tell you that Kamika's at the Trenchtown Reading Centre, And if Kamika is an example of the kind of quality, the caliber of the graduates of the Trenchtown Reading Centre, I think we can be really proud. Thank you, Kamika. That was brilliant. So we can all go home now. That was. I think everything after that will be a bit of an anticlimax. Well, the next person I have to introduce is myself. Let me just say that my name is Tony Clayton. I'm at the University of the West Indies, and I work quite a lot on national security issues. And this morning, going to be looking at some of the opportunities and challenges surrounding the proposed hub. Now, as of course everybody knows, we're living through a time of really remarkable economic transformation. Since 1985, China's GDP has gone up 16-fold. About 2 months ago, they overtook the United States. They are now the largest economy in the world, measured in terms of purchasing power parity. They're still some way behind in terms of exchange rate, but some point in the 2020s, thereabouts, they could overtake the United States. It's possible to become the world's largest economy. However, the growth rates in China are now being regularly exceeded by a group of 20 or so other developing countries, ranging from Bangladesh through to Nigeria, Turkey, Vietnam, Indonesia, and so forth. So it's, and even more remarkably, of the 10 fastest growing economies between 2000 and 2010, 6 were actually in sub-Saharan Africa. So we're living through a really extraordinary process of economic transformation. This is probably the most rapid and extensive shift in world economic power in history. And there are therefore some interesting issues as to whether we are benefiting from this extraordinary surge of global growth as much as we should. I think the answer to that is no, we're not, at least not to date. And the development of the proposed hub is one way that we can try to capitalize on this process of economic transformation, because what we're seeing in parallel with the rates of economic growth is a sustained growth in shipping. And at the moment, world cargo volumes are growing at about 3% per annum, which means that by the time we get to 2025, we'll be shipping double the world tonnage that was shipped in 2005. To date, a lot of this growth, as you can see on this chart, is actually driven primarily by increased imports to the US, North America, and Europe, largely from China. And if you look at the scale at the bottom, the lighter the color, the more the journeys. So the way you see the yellow lines on that chart, these are over 5,000 shipping journeys on that particular route. And it gives you an idea of where we are. We're very strategically situated, right in the middle of one of the world's busiest shipping channels. And a lot of countries are investing in transport infrastructure as a result. And China is making a number of investments around the world in the global supply chain, in everything from commodities through to access to for their manufactured goods and transport infrastructure. A lot of their investments, it's quite hard to make sense of if you look at them purely in terms of return on investment. So it appears as if China is playing a geopolitical strategic game in terms of securing access to raw materials and access to markets. But amongst other things, of course, they are spending a lot of money in Latin America and the Caribbean, and they've already been spending money here in this country on rehabilitation of roads and bridges, and they're talking about investing in a new transshipment operation, which would add to the large hub that we're talking about building here. Of course, other countries are also investing, notably Panama. They, at the moment, are spending about $5.3 billion on expanding the capacity of the Panama Canal. This will allow them to take ships, I think, up to 13,500 TEU, which is more than double the current capacity. This, however, is actually not going to be enough because we're already building ships with a capacity of 22,000 TEU. So the Panama Canal is actually risk of becoming too small even before they've finished widening it. And possibly partly as a result, Nicaragua is also talking about building a new ocean-to-ocean canal. This canal would be about 3 times longer than the Panama Canal, and it would cost about $40 billion. Now, that's the official estimate. Unofficially, I think it could be about 3 times that. Now, this is an extremely high-risk project for for Nicaragua, beg your pardon, because their GDP is about $11.5 billion. So they're talking about spending minimum 4 times their GDP, possibly even as much as 12 times their GDP. Of course, they can't possibly do that. This is all money coming from a slightly mysterious character in China who's talking about putting up the cash to construct the canal. So everybody's trying to get in, but there are some potential risks that we have to at least take cognizance of. One of them is that as a result of climate change, the Northwest Passage, north of Canada, is now open for shipping. Now, in some ways, it's not the most convenient shipping channel in the world, but it is about 1,000 nautical miles shorter if you're shipping from Asia to Europe than going through the Panama Canal. Now, that reduces shipping times by about a week and reduces your shipping costs by about 25%. So it could be that just at the time that we're putting in all this investment, that a major new shipping route opens up and takes some of the business away from here. Obviously, it won't take all the business. But this is just one of the potential risk factors that we have to consider. Another is the possibility, which has been discussed for some time, of a hard landing in China. Because of the frenetic pace of development in China, China's total bank debt is now about $25 trillion, which is actually more than double the total size of the commercial banking sector in the United States. And even by China's standards, that's not a trivial sum of money. What's slightly more worrying is where you see all that money has gone. Most of it has been borrowed by local government and state-owned companies in China. And most of that has actually gone into real estate, into building cities now with no inhabitants. Now, if China's growth slows and the demand falls, a lot of that debt could quite suddenly become unrepayable. I'm sure China's growth will continue in the long term, but it is quite possible that they could go through a very painful economic restructuring which would take several years, and in that time we would see major implications for countries that are hoping to benefit from the associated growth. In fact, this has already started to happen. Brazil had 7.5% growth in GDP in 2010, largely due to their exports of iron and soy to China. Now, as a result of the slowing pace of growth in China, Brazilian economy actually went into recession this year. So that, I think, is an object lesson in how you have to be careful when your growth projections are pinned on the economic fortunes of another country, which already has a possibly unsustainable debt crisis looming. And another, perhaps more longer-term harbinger of possible change is that China is now being undercut in terms of the costs of production by a number of countries, including Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia, which you can see on the graph here. And so it may actually be that there are other factors, including demographic change, that the rate of growth in China, on which a lot of our hopes are pinned, actually start to slow down. I do not think that this will affect the fundamental pattern, which is the shift of manufacturing to Southeast Asia. But nonetheless, these are some of the economic risk factors which we should take into account in our decision-making. Another factor, which is quite a pressing concern, is simply that we live in a tough neighbourhood, and we are seeing an increase in shipping operations of illegal narcotics through this region. At the moment, the estimates are that there's been a really quite a significant surge in the percentage of cocaine coming through the Caribbean. About 4% of U.S. market for cocaine was supplied through the Caribbean islands in 2011. Now it's up to about 16%, and it's probably 20% for Europe. So we are seeing the traffickers move away from the overland route in Mexico, which is getting more difficult for them, and starting to move the shipments back through the Caribbean, which is, of course, where they were in the 1980s until the US Coast Guard pushed them out of the Caribbean into the overland route through Mexico. And now we're starting to see some of the shipments move back over onto this side. And, of course, as a result of the fact that we have major flows of illegal narcotics, we have counterflows of illegal firearms. This is unfortunately always the case. Wherever you see a major trade in illegal narcotics, you also see a thriving trade in illegal firearms, for the simple reason that the narcotics are illegal, so you can't protect your business with lawyers and patents and court cases. You have to defend your business with violence or the credible threat of violence. So the fact that the narcotics are illegal creates this parallel trade. And as a result, we live in the world's epicenter, homicide epicenter. 8 out of the 10 most violent nations in the world are in Central America and the Caribbean. And we, God help us, are one of them. It's where you see typically these factors overlapping. Major profits available from shipping narcotics and extortion and other forms of criminal behavior, widespread availability of weapons, and weak or corrupt governance. And where you see those factors coinciding, you almost invariably see extremely high rates of homicide. So that seems to account for the pattern that we're seeing here. And this is what we sometimes think of when we think of transshipping through the Caribbean. This is a fully submersible submarine captured under construction in Ecuador. And this is really a very sophisticated submarine, 30 meters long, capacity payload of 10 tons, operate at 20 meters depth. But in fact, this is slightly misleading, even though the Coast Guard US Coast Guard are intercepting one of these about every 6 weeks at the moment in the Caribbean, because the preferred shipping technology actually looks like this. This is the drug cartels not being stupid people. Find it very convenient to use regular shipping channels to move illegal goods. It makes more sense than trying to set up your dedicated channels. This is the Long Beach in California, which is the largest and busiest port in the US. And it was discovered recently that the Sinaloa cartel were shipping precursor chemicals to manufacture methamphetamine made for them in India or China. And they actually ship it directly into the United States. Now, they don't ship it straight to Mexico. The reason for that is quite interesting. They leave it sitting in the warehouse in Long Beach, California, for weeks, and then re-export it to Mexico. Because goods being exported from the United States into Mexico don't get the same level of attention. If it was going straight into Mexico, it'd be looked at more critically. So there are ways in which the cartels use transshipment operations to get around areas where they know there's going to be higher surveillance. And this is obviously something which we should be aware of if we are now proposing to expand our business in this area. In 2012, the police in Belize intercepted a shipment of precursor chemicals from China, believed to be destined for the Los Zetas cartel. It would have manufactured into about $10 billion worth of methamphetamines at street value, obviously. But it indicates the extent to which the cartels are, in fact, now using conventional shipping channels. And Chinese triad activity has been detected already in Argentina, Peru, Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, and Trinidad. Initially, in the first phase, it's largely focused on extortion, people trafficking in narcotics, and increasingly now precursor chemicals, counterfeit goods, and money laundering, because another reason why they're interested in the Caribbean is that we offer money laundering facilities, and in spite of our best efforts, I'm afraid that is still the case. And there are still corrupt officials and corrupt lawyers and people who are willing to facilitate the transfer of proceeds of crime through various jurisdictions in this region. Another risk factor that we have to take into account when we're talking about putting more infrastructure down at the water's edge is the projections for climate change. These are quotes from a recent World Bank report, 2012, warning that we might eventually get 4-degree temperature rise by the end of the century, at which point they're saying that the sea level would be as much as a meter higher. Now, at this point, we are having to think about some planning for some fairly devastating consequences, including many of the world's centres of population and centres of agricultural production having to migrate to more temperate zones. Although something like 98.5% of the global impacts would actually affect mainland states, not island states, the reason why there are grounds for particular concern about the island states is that so much of our infrastructure is in the same place. It's in the same small coastal strips, typically. So our centres of population, our main centres of economic activity, our main transport infrastructure is typically all co-located in the same small coastal strip. So you could then conceivably have one major event, a storm surge on top of a sea level that's a metre higher, and you could lose a lot of your infrastructure and a lot of your capacity to respond in the same incident. And that's why I think we have to be sensitive about this. This is a satellite picture of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, just before it impacted on New Orleans. And I'm sure you remember this is what it did to New Orleans. They got a storm surge of 28 feet from the sea. As well as that, they had enough rain to raise the height of the lake behind the city by 7.5 feet. And the combination, the volume of water was obviously more than the dams could withstand. The dams burst, and the city, much of which was actually below sea level, simply filled up with water. And then, a few years later, there was Hurricane Sandy. Now, this is the picture of the New York subway, and you can see that they've closed the doors in an attempt to keep the water out, a fairly futile undertaking. The cost of building sea defences for the city of New York was estimated at about $6 billion, which would have looked extremely expensive, right up until the moment when Sandy arrived, and caused damage estimated at $40 to $50 billion. And this is always the problem when you're arguing for increased investment initially to put in sea defences, and people say, but it's too expensive and we can't afford it. Well, the problem is it always looks too expensive until the disaster, and then all of a sudden it looks really, really cheap. Now, this is a difficult argument to get across sometimes to policymakers, but if we're talking about putting more infrastructure down at water's edge, we really do need to be thinking about ensuring that there is some reasonable level of protection against storm surge on top of a sea level that is going to be higher than it is now. This is one of our more vulnerable areas. This is Portmore. According to Statin, there are 182,000 people who live there. According to the mayor, who said, no, there are 300,000 people who live there due to informal multi-occupancy. That immediately, I think especially for the JCF, presents a serious challenge. How many people do you have to evacuate? Well, we don't know. That's quite... that's not a good place to start from. Now, the area in pink here shows the area, the part of Portmore which would be underwater in the event of a major storm surge. What this shows is the effect of a 5-metre storm surge in Kingston Harbour. And everything to the right of the red line is actually under 15 to 18 feet of water. And given that most of the buildings there are actually single-storey, that means that the water is actually over those roofs. Everything to the left of the red line is inundated, but not to quite the same extent. And as you can see, the 3 main evacuation routes out of Portmore are all underwater, which would also give you a very serious problem if you had to evacuate the area. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this, I know there are some people who are not convinced that this could happen, but actually it can. And the reason why we know that is it already did. It happened in 1722, which is a long time ago, and it happens because this is an example of a low probability, high impact event. This is only going to happen if we get a major storm system tracking pretty much due south and forcing the water up into Kingston Harbour. That doesn't happen very often, but because it has happened before, we know it could happen again. And so the thing is, when we're planning, is we have to take account of things that don't happen often, but could be devastating if they did. And so the potential issues that we have to take into account if we want to maximize the benefits of the hub, but without incurring too many of the downside risk, is we have to be aware that other people will also see this as an opportunity. Bad guys will see this as an opportunity too. They will see this as a facility which they can utilize to increase the shipments of narcotics, weapons, and people. Secondly, that as we take on an increasingly important role in world trade, it actually places us more at risk of getting involved in someone else's war. Now, as we've seen with, for example, the Bali nightclub bombing, which is not aimed at the Balinese, it was aimed at Australians. The Luxor massacre in Egypt was not aimed at Egyptians, it was aimed at American tourists. The fact that you are not currently quarrelling with anybody does not protect you from being used as the site for an attack against a third party. And so if we become a major transshipment hub for the United States and control a significant part of the imports to the United States, that all by itself makes us a tempting target to people whose argument is with the United States rather than primarily with us. But this is something also that we need to think about so that we build in the appropriate security measures during the design stage. There are, of course, issues about what this will mean in terms of our national demands for energy, water, and so forth, and how well we will manage the environmental impacts, and concerns about where our infrastructure is, and are we putting too much infrastructure in areas that could be vulnerable to tsunamis or storm surges or hurricanes, and so forth. So the sorts of things that we need to be thinking about during the course of the day is how can we improve our maritime domain awareness? How can we improve our search and rescue capability in the event of a major disaster? Can we significantly strengthen our intelligence sharing capability with strategic partners overseas and within the Caribbean? Can we factor in stronger security in the infrastructure? Can we actually identify and address any resource and capability gaps in our defense and security systems? And can we think about the flood control and sea defenses that will be needed for any such investment? Provided we do that, I think we have a good chance, or a better chance, of getting more of the benefits and incurring less of the potential costs associated with this development. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And now we'll take questions at the end. If you're okay with this, we'll just push through very quickly the next three presentations. I'd now like to invite Brigadier General Rocky Mead, the Deputy Chief of Defence Staff of the Jamaican Defence Force, to come to the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to say this is really a very good opportunity. This is much needed interaction. We've been having discussions about the potential of logistics hub in Jamaica, and these discussions are really very important to ensure that we approach it in the right way. It's always good to appear after Prof. Clayton in presentations, because usually before I can make a point, and my main point will take 2 minutes, but usually it takes a bit of time to set the context. And Tony has done such a good job of setting the context that I'll just run through most of my slides and, probably won't use up most of the time. But your point of departure is a good one, which I'll come back to in looking at where I wanted to spend a little time looking at our domain awareness and so on. So that will be good. So the So what I hope to do is to just speak a little about some of the things we should be thinking of from a security perspective to ensure a successful global logistics hub. And as I said, Professor Clayton, in his final slide, actually alluded to some of the things I want to speak about. So what I want to do is to spend less than brief time, since I'm following Professor Clayton in looking at just a few aspects of the strategic context, the positives of Jamaica, but also the potential for increased illegal activity, and then some of the capability issues. Now, some of this information would have come up in Professor Clayton's presentation, but the point I wanted to bring out here is that we have a lot more coastal areas to contend with than you would assume from a country our size. And so what that does is presents opportunities but challenges as well, because obviously it is the issue of our location and the extent of coastal space that we have that actually makes Jamaica attractive for one of the key logistics hub for the world. And you know, certainly our location within the Americas, where we sit, you know, right in the middle between North and South America, and what is, I was going to say, the largest market, but Tony has already advised us that China is taking that over. But nonetheless, we're still talking about between the United States, Canada, and all the Latin American countries, a very significant market, you would agree, notwithstanding the growth of China. So there is a market in this region that's not going to go away, and we are sitting right in the middle of it. Now, there are other countries sitting around us that could consider themselves potential sites as well, but we have some natural advantages, such as the depth of various, you know, harbor spaces that would make us a more natural fit. The thing is, though, that we have to get on with it in order not to lose the opportunity. The final bullet there is noting that not because the military is anywhere close to perfect, but just a function of the size of the different forces you find in the Caribbean. The Jamaican military has some influence in the region, and you know, we're looked upon for leadership from other regional forces. And so in addition to what we see as our responsibility to be a part of the analysis of what is required to ensure that the country is prepared, is to and help to develop best practices that may be useful throughout the region, because some of the threats that Professor Clayton mentioned already are actually regional, multinational threats. And so the relevance of the region in a discussion about Jamaica's logistics hub is that some of the problems, for us to tackle them properly, we will need to collaborate with our colleagues in the region. But as I said, they expect to get some leadership from our side. And so what we are doing now is not that we have all the answers now, but we are an active part of the dialogue, of the analysis, of the issues, so we can contribute to the solution. Now, this slide is again just to show you the context of our areas of responsibility versus our size. As you can see, we're speaking about several times. Now, there are two overlapping borders here. You have our exclusive economic zone, which is the red border, and our flight information region. by the way, we have our commanding officer of the Coast Guard here, so I'm sure she'll pipe in during the questions if I get any of this wrong. But what this shows is that we have responsibility way in excess of what our land mass would suggest. And it is primarily a maritime responsibility, that we have. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the next set of slides because, as I said, Professor Clayton did an excellent job. By the way, the traffic bullet should be more in line. Those are not subtopics, but equal. Professor Clayton did a good job of showing the context. You can plug that in. But I just want to quickly mention that already we have a situation where there's excessive trafficking of narcotics, weapons, humans, and just about anything else that organized criminal entities can do to make a dollar. Proliferation of gangs. Professor Clayton mentioned that when you have a business going, you have to protect that business, and violence is the means by which the organized criminal organizations protect their business. There's also the possibility of terrorism. Again, Professor Clayton mentioned the fact that we don't have to have enemies of our own or direct enemies to attract terrorist action. To the extent that we are close to or friendly with or have business partners, tourists from countries that may not be viewed favorably by extremist organization, then we could be the subject of terrorist action. And of course, natural challenges, of course, and Professor Clayton pointed out the costs of things like hurricanes, and the example he gave of New York is quite telling, where for want of $6 billion, they were faced with bills of $40 to $50 billion, which is quite informative. Earthquakes, we haven't had one, knock wood, of any significance for quite a while, but of course, the region is ripe for earthquakes. Just 4 years ago, we had to respond to our neighbor to the north, and the same fault line actually goes through Kingston. More pressing is the issue of health-related challenges. And this is a good time to mention that, because I don't know if you would have been exposed, but yesterday there were a number of opportunities where the Ministry of Health, assisted by a number of agencies, provided some additional information to the country. The Minister of Health had a presentation, a press brief in the morning, where he outlined the results of a fact-finding mission to Cuba. And later in the evening, there was a session sponsored by the PSOJ companies and Medical Association of Jamaica, where we looked at both the chikungunya effects and Ebola. And that's it, thank you. And what was interesting is Dennis Chung from the PSOJ did a presentation in which he illustrated the impact on GDP of these medical challenges that we're facing. He did some calculations based on just manpower loss, nothing else, not even the spending power of persons who are not earning and can't go to work. He just calculated based on estimates of the number of persons who were down with the chikungunya virus and the manner was lost. He was looking at, I think, over 2% of GDP. And of course, he looked at the fact that if we should have an Ebola challenge, how much more it could be affected. So the point of this context that we're trying to paint is that while we're trying to attract businesses to Jamaica which God has located perfectly for us to do this hub. There are challenges we have in our general context that we have to think about how to address, to at least provide some assurances, if not guarantees, to the persons who are hoping to invest billions of dollars in Jamaica, that we at least will have some provision to tackle these challenges so that their investment will be reasonably safe. And so we cannot ignore issues like the natural disasters and the diseases, because of course, if we demonstrate in the next couple of months that we are not capable of handling an outbreak which can have national consequences on the workforce and industry, we will look a little less attractive, notwithstanding how well positioned we are, etc. In that context, the Jamaica Defense Force is working very closely with the Ministry of Health. I would have made the point at the presentation yesterday that not only are we making available to the Ministry of Health, not only are we making available to the Ministry of Health our assets and resources that we have, but we're helping the Ministry of Health to build capacity. So, for example, we have quite an impressive op center, which I have a slide on a little later on. But we're not just going to hold on to that and let them come to us for information from the op center. We're actually seeking right now to help the Ministry of Health build their own op center so they can have their own internal capability. Let me just move down quickly. As I said, I'm not going to tarry on these slides because Professor Clayton thoroughly covered these issues already, and I was told that I have just a few minutes left. That top one, you may remember, was a result of our own internal security challenges that we have, which people are coming to invest will also observe and see how it was handled. Now, in that particular case at top there are 2010 issues. There are different perspectives of what went right, what went wrong. What Jamaica needs to ask itself is that when the JCF said that, look, there was no more policing answers to that internal security problem that we had in a particular section of Kingston. If the Jamaica Defense, if you did not have a military to respond, and if we were not able to respond with all our capabilities, or if we had responded and failed, where would Jamaica be now? Could you be talking about a logistics hub? If the organized criminals had succeeded in isolating a section of the city of Kingston, and both the police and the military had failed to deal with that section, do you think they would limit themselves to just that section of Kingston to dominate? And would we be able to be talking about attracting people here now? So whatever your criticisms might be about methodology, whatever the fact is that within 24 hours of the military being called in, after they were burning police stations, shooting our policemen, even burning their own community centers that the police built to help them, as they did in Hannahtown, within 24 hours, the military and police working together was able to get that situation under control. Okay? And sometimes while you still have a right to criticize, comment, and say what you would do with hindsight, because hindsight is always 20/20, just ask yourself what would have happened had the joint military police operation failed, and would you have been in a position now to seek to attract people to this wonderful location for a logistics hub? This is a slide, I'm sure you would have seen it before. It's on the JAMPRO website, so I'm not going to belabor it. It's not my job to sell the positives for the hub, but I just thought I'd put it up there. Lots of positives for the hub. Let me move on to my main point quickly. Again, this slide was borrowed, and it showed the potential for employment, based on what is happening in Singapore now. In terms of landmass, Singapore is about our size. Population, they are a bit more than us, but still small, and, they are doing great things. And so there's a potential for employment that could well exceed our unemployment figures right now. let me move on quickly. But it's also an opportunity for criminals, It's also an opportunity for them, because if you are, Professor Clayton made the point about the Sinaloa cartel using normal containers. So if you are shipping more containers, if you are moving more containers, they have more chances of getting stuff through. So it's opportunities for them. Leveraging legitimate business. At this stage, there is the challenge that you could have criminal organizations seeking to put in proposals and funds to establish what appears to be legitimate business, because we are now at the stage where we're trying to attract a lot of business. So we have to be careful of that. Those who are approving businesses coming in, obviously, chance of increased corruption, increased illegal activity. Let me just run quickly to this slide. Okay, right. One of the points that Professor Clayton mentioned in his last slide is us being aware of our domain. And that's where I wanted to spend a couple minutes. In our first strategic defense review that we did about 6 or 7 years ago, we put a proposal forward for having complete awareness of our maritime and aviation domain. And this slide depicts what we see as the ideal coverage, where you have land-based sources, radar, etc. You have aviation resources, even satellite links if we can get access to it. You have long-range maritime patrol aircraft. We have large offshore patrol vessels, inshore patrol vessels, and they all tie into an operations center that gets all that information, so we're aware of what is happening. Because before you can do anything about a problem, you have to be aware of the problem. Now, we have gone a far way thanks to input from the government and a number of our partners in achieving this. We actually got, within a year of doing that first strategic defense review, we got 3 new offshore patrol vessels that we're actually looking to refurbish now. We have an operations center, which I'll show you another slide on. We have relationships with our international and regional partners for getting feeds that they have. So anyone in the region with radar or other ability to look at the domain, we have sharing relationships with them so we can get a wider view than the resources we have. Let me just move down quickly. This is talking about the op center that we have. Earlier this year, we opened our op center that really is quite comprehensive in what it can do. It allows us to take information from a wide range of sources and process it there, and that can guide operational interaction. In fact, this asset, we've been using it to track like chikungunya and Ebola. So it is not just the obvious security, organized crime type issues that we track. This resource will allow us to track all of that. Now, there are a couple other things I want to say. There are some things that we can outsource. There are a couple of companies that have come here and made presentations to us offering to manage the whole security apparatus. And there are pros and cons to that approach. Some of the pros is that these companies have a lot of international experience. Some of them are managing very large ports worldwide. And it would save us the challenges of worrying about the administration, the logistics, and so on. You just pay them whatever they're charging, and they take care of the port security. But the challenge is the control that you have, because if you don't pay the bill for a few months, what might they do? So one of the things we need to consider here is that as large multinationals come to invest in the logistics hub, the security component needs to be a part of that dialogue. So if they're coming to invest $2 billion US in a project, we need to see whether 200 million of that can put in some security components as a part of their investment in Jamaica and the hub, so that we're not looking to treat with that entirely separately and then we're running around wondering where to find it, because 200 million as a part of a 2 billion US project is almost nothing. It's a small percentage. But standing alone, it could seem like a large amount to find. So I am going to stop there. But just to say that from the Defense Force perspective, what we're doing is participating in the analysis, the ongoing analysis. We had our own seminar about 2 months ago in Monique, and we are continuing to build capability, like the Maritime Domain Awareness Project, like the Up Center. But we're saying that there are a lot of other gaps, and the other partners need to be aware of how criminal gangs might manipulate the opportunity to appear to be legitimate, and also the fact that when businesses are coming to invest, the security bill and the security requirements must be a part of that dialogue. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now have about 5 minutes for any comments, questions, discussion. Yes.
Thank you, Professor. Just to clarify, Brigadier, that it was 0.5% of GDP on the chikungunya, and upwards of 2.5% if Ebola comes. But what I wanted to know, Brigadier, I believe that the border security is very important. The question I have for you is, are you being provided with adequate resources to address the border situation effectively, or is this just theory without practice because you don't have the money? If you don't have the money, let me know, so we can advocate for you.
Let me respond by saying I'm always happy to have dialogue with you to see how we can work together to make things better. I don't want to make any public pronouncements that would seem to be challenging the government's approach to funding security. I think within the context of the realities of the country's budget, I think we have done fairly well, very well in fact. So I can't say to you that we have everything we need. For example, I mentioned the Maritime Domain Awareness Project. We do not yet have the air assets to do the long-range maritime patrols, but it's a project that the government has signed off on, and we ourselves can see the challenges in the budget. So I don't want to say anything to suggest that the government is not focused and allocated. We actually have quite a decent chunk of the pie, but there is opportunities for private sector collaboration, because there are a lot more things we could do if we have access to assets. Some of the things we have done, for example, with our international partners, like the Operations Center I mentioned, we got significant support from Canada in doing that. So we seek to leverage all our partners locally and internationally, and we don't have everything we need, but it's not because of not getting a fair share of the pie. The pie is just too small, at the moment.
Thank you. Any other? We've got time for perhaps 1 or 2 more. Any other questions? Questions or comments? Well, in that case, perhaps I could just add to that. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Didn't see you.
Yes, Brigadier, in your maritime awareness domain, I did not see any sort of arrow moving from the northeast coast of Jamaica, and so the Portland area there. I don't know if that area has not yet been brought into perspective.
My apologies for the limitations of the graphics. We didn't want to make it too crowded. But the principle of what we're trying to show there is that we would want to have land-based resources all around, sea-based resources, air resources, and feeds from satellites if we can make arrangements with our partners. So it was not my intention to exclude any particular area. We want to have certainly all-round awareness of our space, but it's just a limitation of the graphic presentation. Okay. There's a more detailed document that I could use, some more comprehensive than the graphic would suggest.
Time for one more, if it's quick. Well, in that case, perhaps I could just add that last point and say that, of course, one of the things that we must do is look at new technological options, which might